It was late in the evening when Sarah found the letter. The clock on the wall of her living room ticked steadily, each second bringing her closer to a new chapter in her life. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above, and she could hear the soft hum of the machines in the background, measuring her vitals and ensuring the medication flowed through her veins. The chemotherapy sessions had drained her energy, leaving her weak and fragile. The mirror in front of her reflected a woman she barely recognized, her once dark hair now thin and patchy, her skin pale and bruised, her eyes full of a weariness that seemed almost unnatural. The letter was placed on the kitchen counter when she entered the room, its stark white surface catching her attention immediately. She'd been expecting a call from the doctor, updates about her treatment plan, or maybe a bill from her insurance company. But nothing had prepared her for the piece of paper that was now resting there, the single envelope looking almost out of place. Her heart skipped a beat as she walked toward it. She knew something was off the moment her fingers brushed the edge of the envelope. It wasn't a standard piece of mail, no stamps, no return address. Just her name, written neatly in blue ink, as if someone had taken their time, but not in any way that felt personal. Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope, the weight of what she was about to read pressing heavily on her chest. The diagnosis had come only a few months earlier, terminal cancer, doctors had said. Stage 4. They couldn't be sure how much time she had left, but the odds were clear. No one lived through this. Not many anyway. But the letter in her hand, this letter was nothing like anything she had expected. No comforting words. No condolences. Just a simple message that rattled her to the core. She unfolded it, reading the typed words in front of her, the weight of the phrases sinking deep into her chest. You've been lied to. Everything you thought you knew is a lie. Find out the truth before it's too late. The words were clear, direct, and chilling. She stared at the paper in disbelief, unsure of what to make of it. Who would send such a thing? And more importantly, what was the truth she was supposed to find? The questions flooded her mind, but the more she thought about it, the more she felt an unnerving sense of urgency. This wasn't just some random note. This was a call to action. Sarah's life had been reduced to routines, treatments, and the harsh reality of her diagnosis. She'd grown accustomed to the idea of time running out, of days filled with nothing but the struggle to make it through the next. But this letter, this cryptic warning, shifted something inside her. Was she imagining things? Was this a sign? Or was it something worse? Her mind raced, memories flashing through her like a fast-forwarded reel, the recent fights with her husband. The strange behavior of her closest friends, the odd way her co-workers had started treating her as if she were a ghost. Had it always been this way? Or was there something bigger at play? It was then that she noticed a small postmark on the bottom of the letter, the kind that would normally go unnoticed. She leaned in closer, squinting her eyes, trying to make out the faded print. Sent from 3845 Riverton Avenue. Riverton Avenue. It was a street she had never heard of. The name meant nothing to her, but something about it felt familiar. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow important. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah stood frozen, staring at the letter in her hand. She knew she should just let it go, ignore it, and go on with her life. But she couldn't. Something inside her urged her to take action. Find out the truth. It was a command more than a suggestion, and the weight of it crushed her. She'd been battling for her life in the physical sense for months, fighting cancer with every ounce of her strength. But now, it seemed like there was another battle, one far more sinister, waiting for her, one that no amount of chemotherapy could help her fight. The following day, she found herself standing in front of a nondescript office building, the address of which had appeared in her search results. It was a half-hour drive from her home, tucked away in a quiet part of town. Sarah wasn't sure what she was expecting when she walked inside, but certainly not the sight of an empty lobby. She approached the front desk, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. No receptionist. No staff. Just the soft hum of fluorescent lights above her. Her heart raced as she hesitated, trying to decide whether to turn back. What was she doing here? Before she could think twice, a voice behind her startled her. "You must be Sarah." She spun around, startled, her breath catching in her throat. A man stood there, dressed in a sharp black suit, his face unreadable. He was tall, with dark hair that had been neatly combed to the side. His expression was calm, almost too calm, and yet there was something in his eyes, something that made Sarah uneasy. "I'm sorry, how do you know my name?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been waiting for you." He stepped aside, motioning toward the door behind him. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked in, and Sarah, now gripped by a mixture of fear and curiosity, followed. As she stepped through the door, the room beyond was dimly lit, lined with shelves and cabinets that seemed to hold nothing but dusty files. But what struck her immediately was the man's desk. It was large, covered with papers, photographs, and a single computer that appeared to be more than just an office tool. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "We have a lot to discuss." Sarah took a seat, her body tense, her mind racing. What was this place? What did they know about her? About the letter? The man didn't waste any time. "You've been asking questions," he said, looking straight into her eyes. "About your husband, about your friends, about what's really going on in your life." Sarah's stomach twisted. "How do you know all of this?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Because you're not the only one who's been lied to." For the next hour, the man would explain a story that seemed too bizarre to be true. He told her of an elaborate scheme, a hidden world of betrayal, deceit, and greed, one that involved people close to her, people she trusted. And at the heart of it all, the millions of dollars that had been stolen under the guise of a perfect life. The life Sarah had been living, the life she thought was normal. "Your husband," he said quietly, "he's been part of it all. And you," he paused, letting the words hang in the air, "you're in danger." The following morning, Sarah woke to the harsh reality of what she had learned the night before. The words of the stranger echoed in her mind, unshakable, as she lay still in her bed, staring at the ceiling. "You're in danger." His voice had been so cold, so matter-of-fact, and the worst part was that Sarah couldn't ignore it. The truth he'd revealed about her husband, her closest friends, and the elaborate scheme they were all supposedly part of, it sounded impossible. But there was no denying it, the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Little things started to fall into place. The strange looks from her husband, John, over the past few weeks. The times he'd come home late, his phone always mysteriously hidden away from her view. The way her friends had started avoiding her, their texts growing shorter, their calls less frequent. Had it all been a lie? Had they all been playing a role in something much bigger than Sarah could imagine? And then there was the money. The missing millions. Sarah had never been one to think about wealth or financial matters. She'd lived a modest life, content in her career and her marriage. But now, with everything she'd learned, the idea of money, and the corruption that followed it, felt like an insidious force creeping into every corner of her life. As she lay there, trying to process what she knew, her phone rang, breaking the silence. The caller ID showed it was John. She hesitated. Should she answer? The knot in her stomach tightened at the thought of confronting him. The man she had spent 10 years with. The man she had trusted above all else. Was he truly part of this conspiracy? Or was he just another pawn in a game far more dangerous than she could ever imagine? She answered the call. "Hey, Sarah," John's voice sounded normal, almost too normal, like nothing had changed. "How are you feeling today? Any better?" His words were comforting, but something in the back of her mind told her to be careful. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was walking a razor's edge. "I'm okay," she replied carefully. "Listen, John, we need to talk." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Of course, what about?" "Everything," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound calm. "There's something going on. Something I need to know." John's tone shifted slightly, but only for a moment. "Sarah, you're not making sense. What are you talking about?" "I found a letter," she said, her words spilling out now. "And I went to that office. The one I told you about. They know about us, John. About you. About the money. They said we've been lied to. That you're involved in something. That you've been hiding things from me." The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah could hear John's breath, shallow and quick. "Sarah," he began, his voice breaking slightly, "this isn't what you think. I never wanted you to know about any of this. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" she scoffed, her voice rising. "From what, John? From the truth? What's going on? Tell me everything, right now. No more lies." There was another long pause, and Sarah could feel her heart racing. She could hear the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. "I'll explain everything," he said at last, his voice softening. "But you have to trust me. Meet me at the house in an hour. I'll tell you everything." "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I know," John replied quietly. "But please, just give me a chance. You have to understand. It's not what you think." The line went dead. Sarah's phone slipped from her hand as she sat there, her mind racing. She could barely comprehend the flood of emotions crashing through her. Betrayal, fear, confusion. And yet, despite everything, there was a part of her that still wanted to believe him. Her love for John hadn't disappeared overnight. But how could she ignore what she had learned? What she had seen with her own eyes? 1 hour later. Sarah sat in her car, parked outside the house. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden light across the front yard. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though something heavy was pressing down on her. The house, which had once been a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She had lived in this home for years, built memories here, laughed and cried with John. It was hard to reconcile the man she had known with the man she had heard about in the office, the man wrapped up in lies, deceit, and a criminal scheme. She wasn't sure what to expect when she walked inside. Was John going to confess? Was he going to deny everything? Would he try to manipulate her, convince her that everything was for her own good? Sarah knew she couldn't trust him blindly anymore. But she needed to know the truth, even if it broke her heart. Taking a deep breath, she got out of the car and walked up to the front door. As she reached for the handle, it swung open. John stood there, his face pale, his eyes tired. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. His once confident posture was now hunched, his hands trembling slightly as he motioned for her to come in. "Sarah, please," his voice was barely a whisper. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The familiar smell of their home hit her, the scent of coffee, the faint fragrance of flowers from the vase on the table. It all felt so normal, so ordinary, and yet it felt so wrong. John led her to the living room, where he sat down on the couch, his hands clasped together in his lap. Sarah stood across from him, her arms crossed tightly, unwilling to let go of the shield she had erected around herself. "Okay, John. Tell me. Tell me everything," she said, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. John took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "This is harder than you think. I didn't want you to know, Sarah. I wanted to protect you, but now I see I can't hide it anymore. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand that. Protect me from what? Sarah asked, her voice trembling with frustration. I was working with a group, he said quietly. A group that wanted to get rich, and they needed my help. I didn't know how deep it was at first. But the money was too good. Too tempting. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. You've been involved in a scam? Yes, he replied, his eyes downcast. But it wasn't just any scam. It was $1 billion operation. They were laundering money through several companies, creating fake investments, stealing from everyone involved. And I got roped in. I thought I could control it, that I could use my position to keep you safe, but it got out of hand. Fast. I was already in too deep. Sarah's mind was racing, struggling to process his words. How could he do this? How could he keep such a dark secret from her for so long? Who are these people? She asked, her voice low. Who's behind all of this? John swallowed hard. I don't know who they are. They're shadowy figures, powerful people with connections all over the world. They knew I had access to certain accounts, that I could move money without raising suspicion. I never realized how dangerous they were until it was too late. Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine. She had been living with a man who had lied to her, who had been part of something so dark and twisted. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that everything she had believed about her life, about her relationship, was now in question. I've made a mess of everything, Sarah, John said, his voice filled with regret. And now they're threatening me. They're threatening both of us. Threatening us? She asked, her pulse quickening. Yes, he said, his eyes wide with fear. They know I've been talking. They know I've been trying to get out. And now they want to make sure I don't spill the truth. If I don't cooperate, we're both in danger. The room seemed to spin. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Her body was frozen, as if the words John had spoken had robbed her of the ability to move, to think clearly. So, what do we do now? She whispered, barely able to form the words. John looked at her with desperation in his eyes. We fight back. We have to expose them, Sarah. I can't keep running. But we need proof. We need a plan. Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The life she thought she had was unraveling before her eyes. And with every step she took deeper into the web of lies and deception, she knew that the stakes were higher than ever before. The twist wasn't over yet. The days after Sarah's conversation with John felt like a blur. Every second stretched into what seemed like an eternity as she tried to process the truth he had revealed. She barely slept, haunted by the weight of what he had told her, and by the terrifying realization that the life she had known, the life she had trusted, was a lie. John was right, they were in danger. Every moment felt like a countdown. She had no idea who these shadowy figures were, or how far they would go to keep their secrets hidden. But she knew one thing for sure, if they wanted to silence John, they would stop at nothing to do the same to her. The day after their confrontation, Sarah sat in front of her computer, the soft glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dimly lit living room. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, but for a long moment, she just stared at the blank document. Where could she even begin? She had always prided herself on being logical, on being able to solve problems and think through situations with a clear mind. But this was beyond anything she had ever prepared for. How could she protect herself, protect John, when the very foundation of her world was crumbling? The search for answers was becoming more urgent. The letter that had set all of this in motion, the mysterious stranger, and the cryptic warning that she had been lied to, they all seemed to be pieces of a puzzle she had no idea how to solve. And then there was the threat of the money. The vast sums of cash that had been laundered, hidden, manipulated. John had confessed to his involvement, but what else had he kept from her? Was there more to this than he was telling her? A sudden knock on the door startled her out of her thoughts. Sarah's heart raced. Who could it be at this hour? John had left early that morning, promising to return later with a plan, but she hadn't expected anyone else. Hesitant, she rose from the desk and moved toward the door. As she peeked through the peephole, her stomach twisted with dread. It was him. The stranger. The man from the office who had told her the truth. The man who had warned her that she was in danger. He was standing on her doorstep, his cold eyes staring directly into the peephole. Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. Should she open the door? Could she trust him? But as she hesitated, the man knocked again, more urgently this time. Sarah, his voice came through the door, low and steady. We need to talk. It's about John. Her breath caught in her throat. The mention of her husband's name made her pulse race. What do you want? She asked, her voice shaky. I'm not here to hurt you, the man said. But you need to listen. You don't have much time. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to run, to shut the door and lock herself inside. But the uncertainty, the desperation in the man's voice, pulled her in. There was something about him that felt genuine, like he was trying to help, not hurt. Against her better judgment, she opened the door just a crack, enough to see his face clearly. His dark suit was crisp, and his eyes were intense, like he was carrying a burden far heavier than she could understand. Please, he said, his voice softening. This is bigger than you know. We need to talk. After a brief moment of hesitation, Sarah stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The man moved quickly, his gaze sweeping the room as if he was assessing the situation, sizing up the risks. Sarah shut the door behind him, locking it with a soft click, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was far beyond the physical barriers she had put up. Who are you? She demanded, her voice firm, though the fear still trembled beneath the surface. My name is Michael, he said. I work for an organization that has been tracking the network your husband is involved in. We've been watching him for months now. We know about the money, the fraud, and the people pulling the strings behind all of this. Sarah felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. You've been watching him? How do you know all of this? Michael's eyes flickered with something that could have been guilt. We've been monitoring the situation. Your husband, John, got tangled up in something far more dangerous than he ever realized. And now, he's a liability. The people behind this operation won't stop until they get what they want. They'll come for him, and they'll come for you too. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, they'll come for me? Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. The people your husband is involved with are ruthless. They won't think twice about silencing anyone who stands in their way. If they think you know too much, if they think you're a threat, they'll make sure you disappear. Her breath caught in her throat. The thought of being targeted, of losing everything, it made her dizzy. She had been fighting for survival against her cancer, but this was something entirely different. She was being pulled into a fight she never asked for, one that was much more dangerous than her illness. What do I do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. How do I protect myself? Michael hesitated for a moment before answering. I can help you, but you need to trust me. You need to follow my lead. Sarah's mind was spinning. What choice did she have? She couldn't trust John, not fully, not after everything he had kept from her. She had no idea who else could be involved, who else might be watching her, or who might betray her next. Michael seemed like the only one who was offering her any kind of help, any kind of hope. I'm listening, she said quietly. First, we need to get you out of here, Michael said. This house is compromised. They'll be watching it soon. We need to get you somewhere safe. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Was she really ready to leave her home, the place where she had built her life with John? Was she ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that she was in the crosshairs of a criminal network? Before she could voice her concerns, Michael handed her a small envelope. Inside is a set of documents. Identification, a new bank account, everything you'll need to disappear for a while. We have to move quickly, Sarah. There's no time to waste. She took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were several papers, each one more disorienting than the last. There was a new passport in her name, a set of credit cards, and a few documents that explained everything she needed to know to begin a new life. "This is insane," she whispered. "I can't just leave. I have to confront John. I need answers." "You won't get them from him," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying a hard edge. "He's in too deep. And right now, he's just a pawn in this game. If you stay with him, you'll both be dead in a matter of days." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. The reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't stay in the life she had built, knowing that it was a house of cards about to collapse. "I'll help you," Michael continued. "But only if you trust me. I'm your only chance to survive this. Your only chance to find out who's really behind this." Later that night, after hours of packing, Sarah found herself standing in front of her house, a small suitcase in hand, ready to leave behind everything she had ever known. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. She felt like she was running away from the life she had built, like she was abandoning the person she had once been. But deep down, she knew this wasn't a choice. This was survival. Michael stood beside her, his eyes scanning the street, ever watchful. "We leave now," he said, his tone firm. "No turning back." As they stepped into the car, Sarah glanced one last time at the house. The house that had once felt like a home. Now, it felt like a tomb. What had happened to the woman she used to be? The woman who had trusted her husband, who had believed in the life they had built together? But that woman was gone. The world she had known was gone. And Sarah had no idea what the future held. Only that it was uncertain, dangerous, and full of twists she couldn't begin to predict. The drive was long. Longer than Sarah had expected. She sat in the back seat of Michael's car, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. The night had fallen, casting the world around them in darkness. Outside the windows, lights blurred into a distant stream of yellow and white, like some unfeeling river carrying them away from everything she had known. Every mile, every minute, was pulling her further from her old life. It felt surreal. The woman who had once worried about simple things, about work, about family, about the cancer that threatened to take her life, now found herself running for her life, thrust into a world of betrayal, lies, and unspeakable danger. The night before, she had sat in her living room, desperate for answers, and now she was in the back of a car with a man she barely knew, heading to some unknown place, leaving everything she had worked for behind. Her thoughts were a tangled mess. John's face appeared in her mind, his pleading eyes, his words about protecting her. She had once believed him, trusted him more than anyone else. But now, everything had changed. She had seen the truth. She had seen how far he had gone, and it sickened her to think that he had kept her in the dark for so long. She glanced at Michael, who was driving with a quiet intensity, his eyes focused on the road. She still didn't know much about him. His cold demeanor, his calculated movements, and his cryptic explanations had made him seem like someone caught between worlds, someone who might be saving her or pushing her deeper into the abyss. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice sounding small in the quiet of the car. "Not far," Michael replied, his voice firm but devoid of any warmth. "We're almost there." A feeling of unease crept over her. She had no idea where they were going. Michael had been vague about the destination, saying only that it was safe and that she would be able to think things through. But something about his secrecy unsettled her. Was this really the best option? Was she making a mistake by trusting him? But then, what choice did she have? The moment she'd opened that door to Michael, the moment she had taken the envelope from him, she had stepped into a new world. A world of danger. A world where survival didn't depend on what she knew, but on how quickly she adapted. The safe house. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally pulled into a small, isolated compound. Sarah noticed how unremarkable it was. The house was small, modest, nothing like she had imagined. There were no grand gates, no towering fences, no guards standing by. It looked like a simple suburban house, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. They stopped in front of the house, and Michael turned off the engine. The silence between them felt deafening. Sarah hesitated for a moment before she opened the car door. She stepped out into the cold night air, feeling a shiver run through her. She didn't know what to expect from this place. Was it really safe? Would she be able to trust Michael? Michael walked ahead of her, his footsteps purposeful, as though he had been here countless times before. She followed him, her mind racing. The house was dark, its windows reflecting only the faint glow of the streetlights. The door opened as Michael approached, revealing a dimly lit hallway inside. The person who opened the door was a tall man in his late 30s, with sharp features and a stern expression. He nodded curtly at Michael and then glanced at Sarah, sizing her up. "Who's this?" the man asked, his voice low. "She's with me," Michael replied, stepping inside. "She's safe." The man didn't say another word, merely stepping aside to allow them in. Sarah felt a twinge of suspicion, but she pushed it down. There was no time for second-guessing. She needed answers. She needed to know what had been happening to her life, and what she was supposed to do next. Inside, the house was nothing like Sarah expected. It was sparse, with only the essentials, a few couches, a kitchen, and a small office space that looked like it had been hastily arranged. A large map of the city was pinned to the wall, and several whiteboards covered in notes and diagrams were scattered around the room. It felt like a war room, a place where plans were made, and lives were changed. "This is where you'll stay for now," Michael said, turning to Sarah. "You'll be safe here." Safe. The word felt hollow now. She had been told she was safe countless times before, only to have the ground ripped out from under her the moment she thought she could trust someone. Michael motioned toward the couch. "Sit down. We need to talk." Sarah obeyed, taking a seat, but her mind was still spinning. She couldn't sit still, couldn't relax. Everything felt wrong. She glanced around the room, as if hoping to find something that would make sense of the madness she had found herself in. "I'm sure you have a lot of questions," Michael began, taking a seat across from her. "And I'll answer them. But first, you need to understand what's really going on." Sarah stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "What's going on, Michael? What exactly is this operation?" Michael's eyes flickered briefly, as if he were debating whether to say more. Finally, he spoke. "Your husband's involvement in this, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a larger organization at play. One that controls everything from the shadows. These people aren't just criminals, they are dangerous power brokers. They run several industries, from finance to politics to law enforcement. They have connections everywhere, and they operate with complete impunity." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, connections everywhere? Who are they? Who's at the top?" Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We don't know who's at the top. Not exactly. But we know they're untouchable. They use people like John as pawns in their game, and anyone who gets too close to the truth ends up in the ground. I'm part of a small group of operatives trying to take them down, but we've been fighting this fight for years. It's like trying to catch smoke. Sarah's stomach twisted. This was beyond anything she had imagined. She had thought that the scam, the betrayal, were just isolated incidents, something she could confront, something she could fight back against. But now, it seemed as though John had become entangled in something far bigger, something that threatened not only her life, but the lives of everyone involved. "So, what does this have to do with me?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Michael hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You're part of this now, Sarah. Whether you like it or not. You're a key piece of the puzzle. They know about you. They know that you know too much." The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She was now a target, not just because of John's involvement, but because of what she had seen. The moment she stepped into that office, the moment she read that letter, it was like signing a contract with danger. There was no going back now. "But I don't want to be part of this," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I just want to survive. I just want to be safe." Michael's expression softened for a moment, but he quickly masked it with determination. "I understand. But survival isn't just about running. It's about fighting back. We need to expose them, Sarah. We need to bring them down before they take everything from you, and from everyone else." A new mission. For the next several days, Sarah remained in the safe house, learning what she could about the operation that had consumed her life. Michael trained her, taught her how to be aware of her surroundings, how to avoid detection, and how to protect herself. It was a world she had never imagined, a world where every action had consequences, where every moment could be the difference between life and death. As the days passed, Sarah began to piece together the fragments of information she had been given. John's role in the scheme was clear now. He had been a cog in a machine, a tool used by people far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. And the more she learned, the more she understood just how deep the corruption ran. One evening, as Sarah sat alone in the safe house, she received a call. It was an unknown number. Her heart leapt in her chest. "Hello?" she said, her voice tight. "Sarah," came the voice on the other end. It was John. "You have to listen to me. They're coming for you." The words hit her like a slap in the face. "What do you mean? Who's coming?" "They know everything," John said, panic creeping into his voice. "I've tried to protect you, but it's too late. You need to leave. Now." The line went dead. The safe house felt more like a prison with each passing day. Every minute that Sarah spent locked in the small, sterile space, her sense of isolation deepened. The four walls that surrounded her were a constant reminder that the world she once knew was gone, replaced by something darker and more dangerous. Her freedom, once taken for granted, seemed like a distant memory now. John's cryptic warning still echoed in her mind, "They're coming for you." Sarah had no idea who they were, but the fear in his voice had made it clear that the danger was real. And it was closing in. It was one thing to be part of a conspiracy, to learn that the man she loved had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. But it was another to know that those who controlled everything were watching, waiting for her next move. It had been nearly a week since she had heard from Michael. In that time, he had been in and out of the safe house, working on his own plans, gathering information, trying to track down leads on the criminal syndicate behind it all. He told her that there was little time left before their enemies would make their move, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used as a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The more she learned, the more she realized just how far-reaching and sophisticated this conspiracy was. That night, she sat in the small kitchen of the house, stirring a cup of tea with shaky hands. Her thoughts were a mess. John's words had left her feeling raw, vulnerable. There was so much she still didn't understand. Michael was working behind the scenes, piecing together fragments of information, but there was a growing sense that time was running out. Suddenly, the front door opened. Sarah looked up sharply, startled by the intrusion. It was Michael. He stepped inside, his face hard, his eyes darkened with fatigue. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. Sarah set down the cup of tea and stood up, her stomach tightening. "What's going on?" "There's been a development," Michael said, his tone grim. He walked over to the table, spreading out a series of maps and papers. "They've started to move. The organization has sent people to look for you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The thought of being hunted, of being a target, made her skin crawl. "What does that mean? Who are these people?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down, his hands resting on the table, his expression tense. He took a deep breath before speaking. "They've got their eyes on you. They know you're connected to John. They know that you've learned too much. And now, they're sending people to make sure you can't expose them." Sarah's blood ran cold. The implication was clear, they were going to kill her. And she had no idea how to stop them. Michael looked up at her, his gaze intense. "I'm not going to let them get to you. But we need to act fast. We don't have much time before they move in." "Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael paused for a moment, as if weighing his options. Then he pushed a thick folder across the table toward her. "This is the next phase. We're going to take the fight to them." Sarah picked up the folder and flipped it open. Inside were detailed plans, maps of the city, photos of key locations, and information about individuals involved in the operation. It was all so overwhelming. There were names she didn't recognize, places she had never heard of, and clues that hinted at a much larger conspiracy than she had ever imagined. "There's a meeting tonight," Michael continued, pointing to one of the maps. "It's a gathering of some of the higher-ups in the organization. We've gotten word that they'll be discussing their next moves. If we can infiltrate that meeting, we might be able to get the information we need to take them down." "Wait," Sarah said, her mind spinning. "How can we just walk into a meeting with these people? They're dangerous. How do we even know we can trust any of this?" Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm not asking you to walk into a meeting with no plan. I've been working on this for months. This is our chance to gather intel, to get close to the people at the top. If we're lucky, we'll find out who's running this operation and how far they've infiltrated other organizations." Sarah felt a surge of fear. The idea of walking into a room full of the people who had orchestrated everything, the people who had controlled her life, her husband's life, and countless others, was almost too much to comprehend. But she knew she couldn't keep hiding. She couldn't live in fear forever. "How do we get in?" she asked, her voice tight with both apprehension and determination. Michael gave her a small, grim smile. "Leave that to me." The plan. That night, as Sarah lay in a bed in the safe house, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Michael's plan seemed sound, but everything felt like a gamble. They were walking into the lion's den, and there was no guarantee that they would walk out again. But as she lay there in the darkness, she realized that there was no other option. She could either continue to hide, hoping that the danger would pass, or she could take control of her life and fight back. At dawn, Michael woke her with a soft knock on the door. He was already dressed in dark clothing, ready for whatever was coming next. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. She was in this now, for better or for worse. They drove for hours, Michael taking back roads and detours to avoid detection. Sarah tried to keep her mind clear, focusing on the task ahead, but the anxiety gnawed at her. Every shadow, every car that passed them, seemed to be a potential threat. The paranoia was starting to eat at her, but she kept her composure. Knowing that now was not the time to falter. As they approached the city, Michael handed her a small earpiece. "This will help us stay in contact during the operation," he explained. "Stay calm, follow my lead, and we'll be fine." Sarah took the earpiece and slipped it into her ear, her heart pounding in her chest. It was time. Infiltration. The meeting was held in a private building on the outskirts of the city. From the outside, it looked like any other corporate building, sleek, modern, and unremarkable. But inside, Sarah knew, was a gathering of people whose wealth and power extended far beyond what anyone could imagine. As they entered the building, Sarah felt the weight of every step. They passed through several layers of security, each one more intense than the last. Michael had planned every detail down to the last second, using fake IDs and carefully forged credentials to gain access. Finally, they reached the top floor. The door to the meeting room was guarded by two large men in suits. They gave Michael a once-over before allowing them to pass. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Around a large, polished table sat several men and women, all with cold, calculating expressions. These were the people who controlled everything. The people who had manipulated her life. Sarah's heart raced as she took a seat beside Michael. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. She had to stay focused. She had to get the information they needed. The conversation around the table began, and Sarah listened intently, her senses heightened. She could hear snippets of words, names she didn't recognize, plans she couldn't understand, and hints of a much larger operation that stretched across borders, involving politicians, law enforcement, and businesses. But as the meeting progressed, Sarah's attention began to wane. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The tension in the room had shifted. The air was charged, as if everyone was waiting for something. It wasn't until one of the men at the table spoke directly to Michael that Sarah realized what was happening. "Michael," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with menace. "We know who you are. We know what you're doing." The room was eerily quiet, but the weight of the moment pressed down on Sarah's chest like a vice. She could feel her heart thudding painfully against her ribs, the loud, persistent rhythm matching the dizzying swirl of thoughts in her head. The man at the table, his cold eyes narrowing as he locked onto Michael, had just revealed everything Sarah feared, the game they were playing, the stakes they had raised. Everything was spiraling toward a deadly conclusion. The man across the table, his thin lips twisted into a calculating smile, repeated his chilling words. "We know who you are. We know what you're doing, Michael." Michael didn't flinch. He sat in his chair, composed but tense, his eyes scanning the room. Calculating every move, every word. There were at least 7 people seated at the long table in front of them. Some looked bored, others irritated, but all shared the same icy detachment. The type of people who lived in the shadows, pulling strings, controlling lives with a glance or a whisper. Michael's voice was smooth, almost casual. "You think you know me? You think you know what I've been doing? That's cute." One of the men, sitting next to the speaker, gave a low chuckle, clearly amused. "Cute?" The man's voice was thick with contempt. "Michael, you've been a thorn in our side for years. You've been digging around in places that you shouldn't be." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew she was at the center of something much bigger than herself, but hearing it confirmed in such stark terms made her feel smaller, more vulnerable than ever. She had assumed she was just a victim of circumstance, but now she realized she had become a key player in a game of power and deception far beyond anything she could have imagined. "I've been trying to fix things," Michael said, his calm voice betraying nothing. "Trying to make sure you don't ruin more lives, but clearly, I'm not the one causing the damage." Sarah could feel the tension crackling in the room like static before a storm. She glanced at Michael, searching for some hint, some plan, some way out. But his face remained stoic, his body still. "You really think you can fix anything, Michael?" The man who had spoken earlier leaned forward, his voice soft but deadly. You and your little band of operatives have no idea what you're up against. This isn't just a game to us. It's our world. Sarah's pulse quickened, and she fought to keep her composure. She had always prided herself on being able to hold it together, even in the most stressful situations, but this was something different. This was a fight for survival. She glanced at Michael, who slowly turned to face her. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw something there, a flicker of something human. She wasn't sure what it was, but it gave her a small sense of comfort. What do you want from us? Sarah asked, her voice louder than she intended. Why are we here? The room went silent. Every eye turned to her, some with curiosity, others with barely veiled disdain. We want you to understand the stakes, the man in charge said. We don't want any more interference. No more hiding in the shadows. Sarah's throat tightened. She wasn't sure if she was ready to understand the full extent of what she was being told, but she had no choice now. She had already been pulled so far into this world of manipulation and control. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, right in front of her. You have a choice to make, Sarah, the man said, his voice cold. You can walk away, and we'll forget all about you. Or you can stay, and we can show you how deep this goes. Michael's voice cut through the tension. You're not giving her a choice, but I'll make sure she doesn't make the wrong one. If you think you can just walk away from the mess you've created, you're more deluded than I thought. The man's gaze flickered toward Michael, his eyes narrowing slightly. You've always had a lot of fight in you, Michael. Too bad you've chosen the wrong side. Sarah's mind spun. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but everything inside her told her to wait. Michael was calm, in control. She had to trust him. He had been her lifeline up until now, and in this moment, he was still her best chance at survival. But something else was brewing in her mind. Something Michael had hinted at before but never fully explained, the truth about John. She had to know. She couldn't keep going without answers. Without understanding how deep her husband's betrayal ran. I don't care about your side, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. I want to know what you've done to my life. To John. The man's expression hardened. John was never a factor in this. He was a tool. A necessary part of the plan. You, on the other hand, he trailed off, glancing at his colleagues. Well, let's just say, you've become more important than we anticipated. I'm more than just a pawn, Sarah said, her voice rising with a mix of anger and fear. You're not going to control me. I won't let you. The man smirked, unfazed. Oh, you'll let us, Sarah. You don't have a choice anymore. With that, Michael stood up abruptly. That's where you're wrong, he said, his voice low and commanding. I've already decided. We're not playing by your rules anymore. The room seemed to freeze. The power shifted. For a brief moment, Sarah saw the tension in Michael's posture, the barely contained anger in his eyes. This was the moment. The moment he had been preparing for. And in that moment, she realized that the plan was already in motion. The betrayal unfolds. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open, and two armed men entered, their eyes scanning the room. One of them walked toward Sarah, and she tensed, instinctively shifting away. The other moved to stand beside the man at the head of the table. It's time, the man said, his voice final. Sarah felt her stomach churn. This was it. The moment she had dreaded. The moment where the consequences of her decisions would finally catch up with her. But Michael was already moving. In an instant, he crossed the room, his movements fluid and precise. Before anyone could react, he pulled out a small device and pressed it against the table. A sharp beeping noise filled the room, followed by a sudden flash of light. The men around the table scrambled, their faces momentarily frozen in shock. Michael took advantage of the confusion, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the door. "Now," he shouted. They rushed through the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Sarah's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what had just happened or how Michael had managed to trigger the security system, but she didn't care. She followed him, running as fast as she could. Behind them, she could hear the chaos escalating. People shouting, doors slamming, footsteps pounding against the floor. They were being pursued. The danger wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was real, and it was coming for them. "Keep going," Michael urged, pulling her along. "We don't have much time." They rounded a corner, and Sarah saw a window ahead, the faint light from outside shining through. Michael didn't hesitate. He smashed the glass with his elbow, and they both tumbled through the opening. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were close, too close. Without looking back, Michael grabbed Sarah's arm and ran down the alley. The cold night air stung her skin, and the city's lights blurred past them like a chaotic stream. Every step felt like a race against time. But they couldn't keep running forever. Michael had a plan, but Sarah had no idea how far it would take them. She didn't know if they could make it out alive, if they could expose the truth and stop these people before they were silenced forever. As they rounded another corner, Michael stopped, pulling Sarah to a halt. "This way," he said urgently. They ducked into a nearby building, a decrepit structure that seemed abandoned. Michael checked over his shoulder, making sure no one had followed them. Then he turned to face Sarah. "This isn't over," he said, his voice steady but filled with a grim determination. "We've just scratched the surface." Sarah nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Then let's finish it. Whatever it takes." The final lesson. The chase had taken them to the edge, to the very brink of everything they had fought for. But as Michael and Sarah prepared for the final phase of their battle, Sarah realized something. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. This was about reclaiming control over her own life. She had faced betrayal, danger, and fear. But now, she knew what it meant to survive. She had fought back when she had no idea what was coming, and she had come out stronger. They weren't just up against an organization. They were up against the system that had allowed corruption to thrive. But in this moment, with Michael by her side, Sarah knew that they had the power to take it all down. This was the final confrontation. The truth was within their grasp. And nothing, not even the forces that had tried to crush them, could stop them now. As the sun began to rise on a new day, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, for the truth, for justice, for herself. And this fight? It was only just beginning.